And I know one thing that gets on your nerves because the text messages tell me that. It's gotten to you a little bit. Well, and it's Dan Mullen. Wow, where was I going? Billy Napier saying this: the team he sees on Saturday is not the team he sees during the week. And I know this one's really hit home because it's been multiple times that you have brought that particular thought up. Look, for me, there's two ways to look at that, and it's worrisome either way. Problematic. The biggest one is you not being able to identify issues on your team. You thinking things are good when they're not really that good. I start with the trenches because that's been the biggest disappointment for me. Offensive line can't block or protect. The defense can't get any pressure. That's what we see on game days. So we go back to the preseason, and I share concern for the offensive line, and that was mostly in the pass blocking area, but this team can't run block either right now. That was supposed to be a strong suit of this team. We had heard about, hey, this defensive line can get some pressure. Well, maybe it's because of the offensive line, and you weren't able to identify a weakness in pass rush because if there was success in practice because of that, that's a worry there, that you can't identify that there's a worry because your offensive line's bad, that there's no concern about a pass rush because you can't identify that in preseason. You can't identify that Monday through Thursday in leading up to a game. DJ Douglas, a name that was lauded all spring and fall camp, only to be a huge liability this season. But we could just be looking at this staff can't properly analyze what it takes to play at this level. And then the other side of this is it could actually be true that this team is, for whatever reason, good on the practice field, and it doesn't translate to game day. There's no way for this staff to connect practice to game day. Maybe that's a change in themselves. Maybe that's a change in the players. Makes little sense to me, and I think unlikely to be the case.
So I don't believe them. I believe that's what I've basically said now for about a year. They were talking last year after the Utah game that they thought that everything was pretty uncharacteristic that happened during that game, and I was like, well, that can't be true because I remember Napier saying something specifically after the Utah game, like we didn't have any of these issues in terms of like lining up and those sorts of things when they were practicing with like SEC officials earlier during camp. And I'm like, I don't believe you because you know how to actually, like, if your players should know how to line up, they should know how to be able to get things set up. Same thing with the special teams. Same thing with a lot of the different mistakes that we've seen over the course of the start of this year as well. So, you're really talking about then it's either somebody who's not telling the truth or somebody who's incompetent. Those are the two, those are the two perspectives, and neither one is great, right? I mean, neither one is great. And yeah, I mean, I don't like that excuse that, or I don't even like the statement of, yeah, like Monday through Friday, we look great. And then Saturday we go out and lay an egg. And he's talking, the thing in the clip that you showed earlier is he talks a lot about accountability and responsibility, but where is it? Like, who has been pulled off the field when they haven't done the right thing? Who, when they bust a coverage, doesn't see the game again? Who, when they don't line up correctly? And he talked about that after the game, that they were struggling to get lined up. Well, geez, that's something we were like torching Todd Grantham for 3 or 4 years ago. So it's a consistent problem across the program. And the problem for Billy Napier isn't necessarily that all of these things are his fault, though he can say the buck stops with him. The problem is that he has gone through every single iteration of trying to solve that problem, and it just hasn't hit. David Wunderlich wrote a really nice article over at Gator Country where he went through all the different things, all the different folks that Billy Napier has brought over from Louisiana, players and coaches, and how none of those have worked out. And that the one guy that he's really brought in from outside of the Louisiana bubble is the new special teams coach. And all of a sudden the special teams looks good. It's like, maybe there's a learning experience here. And part of that is having somebody from outside who's seen excellent special teams, who's able to put his finger on the pulse and go, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way because this is going to actually deliver what we need to. Now, look, maybe the special teams will fall apart in the next couple of weeks, and that won't look like some great prediction. But I think there's something to that, right? That Patrick Toney came from Louisiana. Austin Armstrong was a connection from Louisiana. Ron Roberts was a connection from Louisiana. William Piegler was a connection from Louisiana. Jabbar Jalouk was a connection. He's actually been a very positive, portion of the coaching staff that have come with Billy Napier. But the reality is that if you hit on 20% of the coaches that you bring, that's probably an issue. And this is the third defensive coordinator because, it's pretty clear now that Ron Roberts is calling the plays. It's the third defensive coordinator. It's still bad. The offense is worse than it has been the past couple of years. And the offense was sort of middling the last couple of years. And this year it's bad. So everything has taken a step back. And
Will, can I pick up right there?
Yeah, sure.
Because that was something I wanted to go on this discussion. And then Billy Napier was asked about it today in his press conference about, was he, once again, surprised? Was he surprised that the run game hasn't got going a little more? And he responds, yeah, hence my frustration, as he kind of smiling about that. This was the last question of his press conference. He goes, so we got to do better in that area. It's one of the things that makes the engine go. We have to do better. Some of that is we got to look at what we do well. That's part of where we are. How do we generate some of that? But yeah, I think you're spot on. It's one of those things we've got to get better at. So once again, why is he surprised? I mean, that's a worrisome part of that. But how many times, granted, I'm in the camp of, I think you're better at quarterback and receiver than you are at running back and offensive line as a collective effort. So we know Billy Napier's offense. We know what he wants to do. But the problem with Billy Napier has been adaptability, whether it be NIL, whether it be transfer portal, and now with the offense as well. Look, I chronicled going into last year, and a lot of the losses, dating back to Louisiana, where he didn't have many, but Louisiana and Florida in that first year was Florida has to run for this many yards for Billy Napier to win a football game. And if he doesn't run for this many yards, it isn't going to happen because there's no adaptability. It doesn't matter if your quarterback throws for 300 yards. If they run for 46 yards, Florida's not winning the game because this is how he's built his offense. And there's just been no adaptability to it. And then once again, we're seeing it. He goes, this makes the engine go. This is what I want my offense to be. And it's surprising I can't get it going.
Yeah, the bigger problem there, and I think this does come to the adaptability, is the predictability, right? Like that when your offensive line is struggling, you can't have keys that allow the defense to know what's coming. And I just started at some point basically tweeting, they're in the pistol again. What do you think they did on first down? And there was somebody, I think Donovan Kaiser, said, take a drink every time you see a first down run out of the pistol. And I'm like, I think Donovan has a drinking problem. Like that is a problem that 65% of the time when they're in the pistol, they run. And
go back to Miami's defensive coordinators quotes about the predictability of the offense.
Well, and so look, I love Bud Davis. He's the one who's really pointed this stuff out. But one of my followers tweeted back, look, I love Bud, but when a nerd on Twitter knows what you're going to run based on formation, and he's told you repeatedly in a public forum, maybe you should make an adjustment. And, again, I think Billy Napier's forgotten more about football than I'll ever know.
Sure.
But I understand math and tendencies and predictability and all those sorts of things. And I know when they're in a pistol, there's one of two things happening. They're either handing the ball off to Montreal Johnson or they're going to run a flood. They're going to fake it to him. They're going to run around the corner and have a flood. And the defense knows that too. And so the thing that DJ Lagway actually opened up against Samford is they were able to do some things that weren't a flood or just a hand to Montreal Johnson. Now, the problem in this game is that, the play before the lightning strike was out of the pistol. DJ Lagway hands to Montreal Johnson, loss of 2 yards. And now you got your quarterback at 2nd and 12. You're not running play action on 2nd and 12. Like you got to actually hit every once in a while on those runs. But if they're in the pistol and they know the run is coming and they can bring up a safety late to overload your box, your offensive linemen don't have a chance. And so the offensive line is not the most gifted group of people we've ever seen. They're not the best blocking offensive line we've ever seen. All of that is true. But when you sit there and tell the defensive line, it's like when you sit there at the plate. Like there was a catcher in a minor league. I don't know if you saw the story, but there was a catcher in the minor leagues who just wanted the season to be over, and he was in the playoffs, and they needed to lose one more to be done. And he started telling the opposing hitters what was coming. And all of a sudden, his pitchers are getting teed off on. So and I'm like,
I did
yeah.
not see that story, by the way. So I'm going to have to go look it up.
That was on ESPN. This minor league catcher's telling everybody what's coming. And I'm like, that's all Napier's doing is he's sitting there and he's going, hey, Miami, here it comes. We're in the pistol. It's going to be one of two things. And, you know, if that's the case, if they know what you're going to do based off of the formation, you're doomed. And that is what Miami's defensive coordinator was talking about, is it's not necessarily like, I would guess that it's not 6 plays that Florida runs.
Yeah.
It's 6 formations where they have very distinct tendencies out of those formations. And so when they run that formation, the corner knows it's one of 3 routes that the receiver's going to run. And so one, he can guess, but then he also doesn't have to worry about all the other things on the route tree. And when you're that predictable, when they know what's going to happen, you're screwed. And so that Dan Mullen, for all of his faults, the one thing Mullen always did a really good job of was putting his players in a position where they could succeed, especially on offense, getting his players in a position to do what they do best. And Graham Mertz has limitations, but I don't feel like in the last 2 games that he's played that they've done a very good job of playing to his strengths. They've talked about driving the ball downfield. That's not his strength. And so trying to do it just to please other people is really a fool's errand. Same thing with DJ Lagway. I don't think they utilized him in a way that made a whole lot of sense. Like, one of the things you could have done was, instead of handing the ball off to Montreal Johnson, you could start running some either RPO or run option off of that pistol. And now it's a new look that nobody's seen on film before. But until they decide to do that, until they have a wrinkle, until they have something that's just different than what we've seen so far, we're going to see the same result, because they're telegraphing to the defense what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to throw a shout out to Liquid Flames here, because it hits on something that actually happened to me today with this same exact conversation. He says, I still think the quote, regardless of outcome comment was telling in the post-game press conference. Goes on to say, it tells me he doesn't adapt to the game plan based on the situation or the opponent. And what that is in reference to was using the 2 quarterbacks. And Will, I jokingly asked you last week, what if they did it every other drive? Little did we know that was actually what was going to happen. There was no, I will fully admit, there was no inside info there, guys. I was throwing out a hypothetical that actually came true.
It's the Facebook guy who called you Nostradamus. He was right.
Nostradamus too, by the way. But yeah, it was, we were going to swap quarterbacks every other drive regardless of outcome. So it didn't matter. Now, I would have really loved to see what if Graham Mertz would have come out and it was 7-0 right away. Would he have still done it? Sounds like it. But what if Graham Mertz would have come out his very next drive and made it 14-0 on the 3rd drive of the game, if it would have played out that way? Now, granted, as Liquid points out, regardless of outcome. So maybe Billy Napier wouldn't have, but yeah, there's got to be a feel. There's got to be a change of what's happening in game. And we have said so many times, it doesn't feel like there's a great feel for the game, whether it be the predictable play calling, whether it be maybe not unpredictable, but like the reverse against FSU last year. Look, that wasn't predictable. But the feel of the game, Florida was running the ball down FSU's throat. You had them on your side, their side of the 50. You had the advantageous situation only to break that out. So it's just like the feel of the game. So going back to the quarterback rotation, going back to game calls, going back to game planning. Yeah, the feel is just not there.
Yeah, I mean, so look, the double reverse pitch back to the quarterback to try to throw it downfield is one example of trying to break tendency. But the other example is there was a play for, I think it was USC the other day when they were playing LSU, where they had a bunch of bubble screens out to the right, and they had the tight end running out that direction to block. And he took one, and then later in the game, they were down on their goal line, and they faked the bubble screen, and the tight end took one step out and then went downfield. And the quarterback hit him, and it was like a 12-yard gain. But Kirk Herbstreit on the broadcast was like, hey, that's a wrinkle off of something that they did earlier. And so when everybody's flowing in one direction, when you have been predictable in the past, it should give you an opportunity to have wrinkles off of that. That's one of the things that's been pretty disappointing. Obviously, Trey Wilson wasn't there on Saturday, but in the Miami game, at least, there was a lot of stuff that Florida did in the Georgia game and the South Carolina game and the Missouri game last year, where they moved Trey Wilson around and had him in a bunch of different roles over the course of that game, to a point where they got him matched up on some linebackers in some favorable situations, where Florida was able to convert third downs where they had him in the backfield as a receiver, where Florida was able to was able to throw screens out to Wilson and then flare out another receiver for the same type of screen and then use Wilson coming on the backside to get some sort of advantage there. I mean, I just can't remember the last time I watched Florida's offense, certainly not this year, and said, wow, that was a really creative way to use Trey Wilson, or a really creative way to use that particular player. And so to me, it's not the gadget plays that are the things I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is, okay, you always run a flood out of this particular formation. What is the offset to that? What is the thing that keeps the defense honest so that you can then get back to running the flood, right? And it feels like the only thing that Napier has is, well, I'll hand the ball off to Montrell Johnson and run it. And so the flood is the play action, and the flood is an offset of that. But what's option 3? What's option 4? What's option 5? We haven't gotten to any of those. In fact, I would say that the throw to DK, or not D, was it Badger? The throw to Badger for the touchdown was actually a really pretty play design. But it's the first time all year that I've really thought about, oh, that was a pretty play design. and until they get to that point, and I mean, again, at this point, I think it's probably too late, but it does point out what you're saying, which is the predictability and the non-adaptability and the idea that we're going to line up and run our offense regardless of who the opponent is, as opposed to going, this team has a weak star. We're going to isolate Trey Wilson on that guy. Or, hey, these guys are weak at defensive tackle. We're going to maybe install some trap plays to be able to take advantage of something straight up the middle that's a little bit more quick hitting, or whatever. Like, these guys have weak linebackers. We'll hit the tight ends, those sorts of things.
Well, it blows my mind that we look at recruiting and we take a look at it, and I think you've recruited, and especially with the transfer portal as well, you have a strong group of receivers, and you don't play towards it. You still play to, as you said, fallback, or the main part of the offense is give it to Montrell Johnson, and we're going to run the ball. And you haven't recruited offensive linemen for it to run that style. You've recruited better receivers. You have good receivers. I really like that room. Granted, there's issues in pass blocking too. We know that. But I'd rather change and adapt something in the passing game than running into a brick wall or running into just something that the offensive line can't do. And whether the quick passing game comes to mind, I know that's been brought up, and maybe that could be the next step with those weapons you have at receiver. I mean, I think we've seen with the transfer portal, DK and Badger, Ricky Pearsall before that, they've been able to hit on some receivers. You have Trey Wilson, of course, your best playmaker. So I just think that the better part of your offense is everything to do with the passing game, and it's just not catered to it.
I think we can spend all night talking about the different things that they could do, but we know it's not happening. We're now 30 games into the Napier era. We're not quite there to 30 games yet, but we're 30 games into the Napier era, and we haven't seen it. Right? Mm-hmm. It's the thing that got me ranting about the Tennessee game last week, is that it's there somewhere, but we don't see it, and it's not good enough to do something once every 5 games, or once every 7 games, or once every 9 games. Like, you have to do it over and over again. And I keep just coming back, and everything that I read, everything that I write, everything that I'm trying to absorb here, I just come back to the old Bill Parcells quote, right? Which is, you are what your record says you are. And at this point, Billy Napier's record is abysmal, whether it's win-loss, whether it's recruiting, like considering that he was brought here to fix a recruiting apparatus that was lackadaisical under Dan Mullen, and the results have not gotten any better. The score certainly hasn't gotten any better. And I mean, Dan Mullen got fired after a bunch of one-score losses in 2021, and I think that was the right move. I think we knew at that point that Mullen was not going to get the program where we wanted it to be. But I think we can say the exact same thing about Billy Napier. So we can talk about why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he do that? Why does he say this? Why does he say that? The reality is that it's too late to say anything. The only
Yeah.
thing you can do is show it. And even in this case, it's getting really late to be able to say it. And that's just sort of where we are.